I was, of course, happy with the 50 million pledge, but even more I was happy with the political commitment and the understanding of the importance of the biodiversity which he showed in his speech. So, you know, at the end of the day, money it's important, but even more it's important that you understand why biodiversity is standing for, how we actually depend on biodiversity, and that we in our daily policy actually integrate it when we, for example, talk about agricultural policy, fisheries policy, forestry policy, that we integrate it when we think about the messages which we are, incentives which we are giving to our economies via taxes, via environmentally harmful subsidies, via, I don't know, the questions which are connected to public procurement and so on. So all those instruments, everything is very much important. But I have heard his vision, and this is a vision of somebody who I treasure very much and appreciate.
You mentioned all of these different components fitting together. Do you think in Europe people understand biodiversity? Do you think they understand how interconnected our world, our ecosystems really are? Because I live in London, and for me, chicken comes in a packet. For me, you know, cereal comes in a paper box, and I pour it into my bowl every morning. And if there wasn't any milk on sale at the local shop, I'd be horrified. But I sometimes wonder, do I understand how it all fits together? Do you think in Europe in particular, where we're so developed, is there that understanding?
I would dare to say that more understanding would help. So biodiversity is something where we would not immediately think about something problematic. And I think that we have to work on that, understanding that basically protecting our nature, protecting life, because that's actually what we talk about when we talk about biodiversity. It's protecting ourselves. And if we understand that well, then we will probably take care more for biodiversity also. It's also important that we understand how protecting ecosystems in that context are very valuable. Protecting water reserves, protecting fish reserves and so on. All those ecosystems which in a way are very much depleted already all across the world.
And in terms of the EU, clearly we all know about the financial crisis that is afflicting the EU. It's on the televisions every day at home. But how does that translate to these talks? Does it mean that you arrive here with really nothing to offer bar your blood, sweat and tears?
It's not making the talks easier. We are in European Union today talking about necessity of growth and jobs. We are seeing terrible scenes also on our televisions where people are unemployed, where we have a lot of protests and so on. Of course, our commitment to biodiversity is still standing very high. We are even today, in the year 2010, we were committing 53% of the overall global ODA. So that was already in the middle of our economic crisis. This is approximately 3 billion. We believe that our commitment in the future should be strengthened. We have that as one of the targets which we have adopted together in our biodiversity strategy. There are 6 targets. One of those 6 targets is that we should strengthen our commitment to the global biodiversity. And with that goodwill, we came also here in Hyderabad. But it is for us also important that we do not look only on the questions of the public financing, on the questions of transfer of money, but that also the policies in the countries which are receiving those help are actually very much in line of protecting biodiversity. For example, one typical example would be in the future financing from the European Union. One of the most important instruments will be geographical instruments for financing. There, the recipient countries are choosing priorities. Will they choose biodiversity as one of the priorities? If they will choose it, of course, the level of commitment also from European side will be higher than it would be if they will not choose it. So all that plays a role. And if we add on the top of that, that the real challenge of global biodiversity gap, which we are facing, could hardly be addressed only via the public money, then we come to the questions of how to engage the private money, which is not an easy job. And we come to the questions also of we call it innovative financing, so economic market mechanisms which we can make alive, so that all the incentives which are coming to the economy as such would basically be incentives which would support protection of biodiversity and not the opposite.
Is there an issue that we often see giving money to countries, particularly for issues like biodiversity, is almost donating the money as opposed to perhaps we should perceive it as being an investment?
Yeah, it's basically investment, but I think what we would need to understand is that in that and these are partially also the conditions which we agreed in Nagoya, if you remember, that we would have a good baseline, which means we need to understand what are the needs, and that we would need to have a good reporting system, which means, of course, for that money we would like to know how it is spent, for what purposes, and all that makes also sense. That's why here in Hyderabad, our firm belief in European Union is that until those things are met, it's difficult to agree about definite targets. But on the other hand, we are also very much aware that 2020, when we want our biodiversity targets, Aichi targets, which we agreed in Nagoya, to be reached, it's coming closer. So we need to discuss also how we step up our efforts. And we are ready here to engage of those discussions on some preliminary targets and how we would actually step up our efforts also in that part.
When we think about 2020, there's also the climate finance commitments that are scheduled for then too. Is it time we rethink what we mean by finance? You talked about sort of innovative measures, but is it time we rethink it? You know, just aside from the lines of just dumping a wad of cash on the table.
I think it's important that we really try to find the synergies between both things, between the climate financing, between the biodiversity financing. For example, one typical example is deforestation, RED Plus financing, where many of the things which you basically finance via one mechanism can be hitting two targets with one bullet. And I think it's very important that we try to get as much of that also in our attention. So it is obviously that some of the things are different, but many of the things are also such that we can basically get a kind of synergy, and playing on the synergies, it's something which is never bad.
How difficult is it for someone like you to come here and, I guess, make commitments when the profile of a conference like this back at home is so low? A quick sort of trawl through the UK papers, The Guardian, you would expect would carry one or two stories, but it's literally one or two. How hard is it for you to kind of get your message? And I know you're a keen Twitterer, but you know, this profile of this conference is low, isn't it?
I think that biodiversity would absolutely deserve higher profile, and that is my firm understanding also when I reached from Nagoya, when I've heard many of my political colleagues saying, yeah, now, you know, after the fall of the talks in Copenhagen, now we have first success in Doha, and I'm constantly reminding them, but the real success was Biodiversity Conference, which was in Nagoya. It was a real breakthrough in the biodiversity area, and it's not really still understood and valid as it should be. And also the meeting here, I think, would deserve more attention than it's getting, because that is basically returning us to your question with which you start the interview. Are we understanding also, as citizens, the importance of protecting biodiversity? And this is very much mirrored also in the political attention which biodiversity and protecting the biodiversity is getting. I would not say that my colleagues in my own environmental council in European Union Environmental Council are not understanding that. No, they are understanding it, and they are also very much supporting. That's why the things basically we have agreed there, and we have a strong commitment also coming on that conference. But these are environmental ministers, you know, and of course this is our job. But I think this is something which goes and should go beyond environmental concern. It's part of concern of everybody of us, and it would need to have high political attention.
I kind of ask because there seems to be what you might call a battle for truth at the moment within the EU and within certain countries. Certainly my own, some politicians are saying EU regulation is killing us, EU green regulation is killing us for economic prosperity, we need to strip the red tape?
I have always been one of the strong fighters against red tape, but I have never accepted that argument as an argument that some of the regulation hasn't done really a lot of good things, and also regulation which was adopted on the EU level. So if we are sincere in saying let's address the red tape, then I have nothing against. But if this is just an excuse how we would get rid of some of the commitments, then I would be the first who would stand against that.
Okay, and I guess a final few points. EBSAs, which is one of these awful acronyms, and I completely forgotten what it means, but protected areas on the high seas seem to be one of these issues which we might well see a resolution this week. I think there are 120 which could end up being protected. Is this a policy that the EU is supporting, in favour of?
Yes, we are supporting that policy. We are also actively engaged in our own areas. Of course, this needs to go through normal, also regional these associations like UNCLOS, like Barcelona Convention, then convention which we have for OSPAR, yes, for the seas which are Baltic seas and northern seas. All those have a saying in the development, and it needs a bit of time, but as European Union we are absolutely committed to that direction.
And is there a EU position on geoengineering, which also seems to be an issue that's being discussed this week?
I don't know about that really. Absolutely we have a position, but I was not somehow signaled that there would be something which would be problematic.
Okay, and for you, what would really be a success for these talks? Because when you have 192 countries turning up and 14,000 delegates, there's almost an expectation that we have some big form that we can fill at the end and everyone can leave slapping each other's backs. But realistically, what for you would be a sort of a good metric of success?
For me, would be absolutely keeping a good momentum reached in Nagoya and heading that momentum further, because we cannot expect on each of the conference such breakthroughs like it was Nagoya when we adopted decision about ABS protocol, when we have adopted the questions which are related with Aichi targets, and when we have had it also the road ahead, how we should continue with the means of implementation, which are the issues which we will focus on this conference. So if we continue with that momentum, and if we would all go from Hyderabad with a feeling that the things are going further, not starting to reverse, I think that would be a good thing. All those issues which we discussed also now, I think are important that those conclusions would be reached. For me, it would be important that we would not step back from also some of the decisions which we have reached in Nagoya. And I think that's for me the most important thing. If we reach from here with additional commitment, if we would have the feeling that instead of stepping back, we have a step further, then Hyderabad for me would be a success. I have high hopes in that.